Right, okay, then obviously now we come to the lineup where you go fully international and it's essentially becoming the squad we know now. Right, this in itself is far from a fucking obvious move. This is one of those examples where I wonder how the org, like who decided this, who came up with the vision, because basically, since you are now international and there's no special reason like, well, I'm finished, so I'll play for ENCE, I even think this actually makes this way more impressive as scouting, because the 3 players you started off with, which is still the core of the team now, Snappi, obviously coming from Contact, Spinx had been there in contact with him, and then Dika was just playing in Sprout. It's like, I've told people, like, dude, these players were just available. Like, there's tons of teams could. Any big international org could have these players. Like, by the way, like, it's not like they would pick ENCE over these squads, even if you have the big money and all the big players stuff. So, like, these are, I mean, the joke I even made is this is when Big almost made the mistake going back German, because they used to get all the Sprout players, and then they missed probably the best generation of Sprout players ever with Dika and Spinx. It's like, mate, you could have had those players. So, like, these 3 players, when you sign them, what was the logic behind these particular players? Like, Snappi at that point in time, some people might think he'd be washed up. You know, it's like he's had quite a long career.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first big signing is actually Saw, our coach, who was the head coach of the team. He came in with the Finnish team still being intact. Twista got banned. The whole ESIC thing happened. And we brought in Saw. He quit playing, and he was given the reins. Like, he was given, like, you are now the man who decides who plays in this team, and we give you the mandate to start building a lineup. And of course, we utilized the existing players that we still had at the time, who were still in consideration for the 2021 lineup,
yes,
which was Aldo, Dodo, and then we had Sadix, who was signed with us at the time as well. Those guys were, of course, consulted. They were making lists of different people. I think for all of them, Snappi was actually everyone's first choice. Like, everyone put him as the number 1. And very quickly after the guys getting in touch with him, with our head coach and our GM, they realized there was really, really good synergy between him and our coach Eetu Saw. And we felt like, considering everything that we had just been through, we could really use a level-headed, mature, a bit of an older figure who's already seen life. He's been actually, like, Snappi has, you know, an actual education. He's had a real life actual job. You know, he knows how the world works, right? We felt like we needed a figurehead like that in the team. And we felt also that he's always had to play the second fiddle in the Danish community, because the bigger dogs would always come and chew all of his big talents.
Absolutely.
Like, yes, the Charleses of the world would always come in and just snatch all the best players from his team. So he would only get so far, which is about, you know, top 10 in the world-ish, and he would make some deeper runs in playoffs. But then eventually, once he did that, his players would be just stolen from him. So we felt like he definitely had never been able to kind of fully showcase what he's being capable of doing. So it was a no-brainer. And for him, of course, he had to, like, why did he choose us? You'd have to ask him. But I know he definitely went on and asked about us from other people, from people he knew, he trusted. And then, lucky enough, we've always been an org and people that do our things the right way. So he was getting positive feedback about us as an organization, and he decided that he wanted to build a team with us. And he was the one who brought in Spinx. He had played with Spinx in Contact for a little bit, but he felt like he was the kind of guy that had so much untapped potential. Well, we now see how much untapped potential he had, but we as an org were like, okay, cool. And people would laugh their asses off if I told you how much we paid for him. It's
so low, it's mental, I bet.
It is actually mental.
Sure.
Like,
that's why you know how they do it the same with every great football player. But everyone always claims later, I always knew he was going to be great. It's like these deals tell you they didn't. Like, there wasn't no bidding war for this guy. There was a couple of the orgs were interested, but they're all smaller ones. You know,
the discussion was between, do we get, like, because we had just bought out Sadix from a Finnish corner, we kind of wanted to have him, and then Snappi was like, no, like, we should definitely get Spinx. So we had, I remember it was a call with me, Snappi, our CEO Mika, our GM Nicholas, and Marco, and Marco was just like convincing us, like, hey guys, like, we definitely should do it. Like, he's like, this is such a cheap investment that it's, trust me, I know, like, and he managed to convince us. And I mean, we all know now that was a pretty solid pick to take to have him in the team for sure.
Sure.
And then do you have us also one of the first ones up there in the list of guys, like he was brought in as a star, as the mechanically mega skilled player who they could build the game around a lot. Yeah, I mean, I think he was benched from Sprout. I can't remember if did we buy him out or was his contract running out? I think we bought him out, but it wasn't a big transfer either. But yeah, I mean, it's when you think about the scouting part and the whole that pick that situation, it's all about finding the right pieces on the helm. So for Nicholas or GM to find the right coach and then to find the right in-game leader that work well together, who think about the game in a similar fashion, and you trust them and their understanding of the kind of players we need. And then it's up to us as an org and up to them as players to kind of do our due diligence of them as individuals, as people outside of the game, because the guys will know the insides and outs of how these players are within the boundaries of Counter-Strike. But then we also have to make sure that as human beings, they're capable of functioning together.
When he was on Contact, because it was a Flashpoint org, Snappi actually already did tell me privately, like, the Spinx guy's really good, but this is also like one of the first teams they were in. That was a bad team if people saw, like, that lineup didn't work at all. So the thing is, like, I don't think even Snappi himself knew how actually fucking mega this guy is. Because there's another example of, like, just a perfect thing just falls out of the sky almost. Like, it's not even like he's just a good player. Like, I'd contrast it this way. When the other ENCE lineup got to the top and Sergey was the guy who got, like, the star credit and he got in those top 10 lists, etc., like, he was a good player, certainly. Like, his skills were really nice. He had, like, a nice all-round game. But, like, the Spinx factor, like, the eye test is mental, mate. Like, he really is, like, one of these, like, he's, like, one of the hockey players that scores 50 goals in a season. Like, you just watch it, you're like, this guy is absurdly skilled. Like, it's actually, there's another example of where, like, if you're in a smaller org, it's just a blessing if you can get a player like that. It's going to do so much for the team, as people can see, right? I mean, legitimately, you probably have one of the top 5 players in the world.
Yeah, no, for sure. I don't think anyone would have expected him to go this high in terms of the skill ceiling. For sure, I already saw him like play early on. I'm like, oof, okay, this guy's crisp. But the more experience he's been able to gather playing against the top dogs, the more comfortable he keeps on getting, the better his decision making becomes. In roles where he needs to kind of react into things happening on the other side of the map. For example, you think of Raj Palace, for example, how he can find the timings and make plays. Something similar actually what Sergey used to do back in the day, when you think about it. And then it just feels to me that you'd kind of think that the top players would start countering the things that Spinx does, but he just figures out a new way. He just figures out a new timing, a new way of capitalizing on different scenarios, and it's mega impressive to see what he's capable of doing and how he just keeps developing as a player.
Obviously, in theory, if this was like a normal press interview, you're supposed to just ask all the nice questions, but I'll ask you one where it's a bit of an awkward question, but it's one that people are going to surely be thinking about on the topic of Spinx. So I'll give you an analogy. So my favourite football club since I was a boy in football was Liverpool, right? And Liverpool actually is a team. It's on a different scale, but they're also a team that in the last few years, they've been very successful from scouting, right? It's been getting the right players at the right price, like, the smaller price, but they turns out they basically have a player that reminds me of this Spinx scenario. They have a player called Mohamed Salah, who's an unbelievable striker, and he probably is too good to be on Liverpool. Like, Liverpool itself now is really good because he's on it, but like, as in, like, if you look at how much money they've spent and where the team was, like, hey, like, put it this way, even if you're a fan of the team with him in and you're loving it, your party is just like, we've only got a couple of years of this though, because like, he's probably not going to just retire at Liverpool. He's probably going to be on Barcelona or fucking Real Madrid or Paris Saint-Germain. Some team's going to come along eventually and offer this guy, like, the most money possible. And he's going to go there. And if you're a fan, you just have to accept that. And you have to go, right, let's enjoy the years we get though. Let's win as much championships as we can now, because we know it ain't going 20 years on this thing, right? There's got to be sort of that vibe with Spinx, because people think of the conversation we've had about the economics of the business and stuff. Odds are, it's probably like, unless something radical happens happens. ENCE probably isn't the biggest org in the world in 3 years. You know, like players have a lifespan, how long they play in one place or another. When it's with a player like that, how do you envision what to do with someone like that? Because on some level, if he gets an outrageous offer in 2 years, a year, it has to be considered by all parties, right? So how do you evaluate that? Because there's another thing about being the smaller orgs I think a lot of fans don't understand is sometimes, for example, you actually want to sell if the price is right. If they offer really way above what it should be, sometimes it makes business sense for the org to sell then if they're going to go eventually anyway and then put it back in. How do you envision when you have basically talents that's going to be tricky to keep?
I mean, of course, especially when you see players pop off the way let's use Spinx as an example, pops off. Yeah, I mean, it's a consideration to think about for sure in the big picture. I do say that the salaries that we pay nowadays are competitive for sure. But in the big picture, the only thing that doesn't change in esports is changing. Like things will eventually change. It's just the way it is, the nature of the beast. We did actually continue contract with all of our players just recently, so they are still bound to us for a extensive period of time. So we're good in that front. But what happens in a couple of years, who knows? I don't think we have to kind of worry about it all too much, in the sense that we know that eventually, if these players keep on going up these trajectories, there will be situations where a big dog will come in, and if they want to buy a player, they'll typically just come in with a truckload of money coming in, and then they say, we're buying him. But we don't have any right now. For example, we would have zero interest to sell any of the players. Like, I don't think any of the players would like to, like, unless someone just literally decided to go bankrupt and just truckload like millions to someone. I don't think they would want to leave either, because of how well the team is doing today. Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's consideration, but all at the same time, it's not something we worry about too much. You know, it's just part of the game.
The other thing that's wild to me about this lineup is, I know technically you did have the player change because Maden came in. It's not exactly the same lineup as like at the PGL Stockholm Major, for example. But it's also wild as well. There's another thing no one would predict. Think of all the roster moves that happened at the end of last year. Like all these massive, the G2s of Vitality throwing millions around, trying to get super teams, building it all, even all the NA teams, stacking all players with big salaries. Like the idea your team would be like third or fourth in the world, again, is crazy. Like this is like, they couldn't work out better almost.
Yeah, and also, again, a very reasonable buyout for us to get Maden into the team. I did think about this too when we were making that change, you know, like, how is this going to work in terms of roles? And they kept telling me, like, you know, no, we feel like we need another aggressive player. I'm like, yo, dude, you guys are already super aggressive. Like, how is this going to work? But it actually does make a lot of sense now that you'd see it in when they play, right? I mean, the way that they swapped roles a little bit, it's definitely upped Spinx's capabilities even higher. Maden's just the way that he can play as an entry is just insane. He might not get the most insane numbers, but he can make this one or a couple of plays here and there where he just goes through a smoke, finds a timing, whatever it may be, that can win you that round that you need to win to win a big game, right? So yeah, I mean, I remember a lot of people were actually questioning this move and thinking like, how does this even make sense? But yeah, I guess here we are. It made a lot of sense. And I think the big part of it is too, Maden, socially speaking, has brought in, I think, just a ray of sunlight in this team. He's such a positive guy, very talkative. I think he's become like a second caller almost in this lineup, which is a big thing. It helps Snappi's life tremendously.
The funny thing is, the one flaw I think the ENCE lineup has is actually because the lineup has been too good in the game. Because since the individual players are popping off, Snappi's doing a great job. The map pool is fucking amazing. Like, that's another thing. It's a legit top team. It's not just like a fluke team where if they play these two map. No, the map pool looks really good. The veto's all great. But as a result, it means that the team gets to the point where it's at the point where it's supposed to win the tournament. It's in the semi-finals of the major. You're playing the biggest teams. Like, if people go back and look, the only teams that's beaten ENCE in best of three usually is against the best squads in the entire world. Like, the tough part then becomes, as you saw at the major, obviously, right? What happened at the major, if you're a fan who hasn't watched Counter-Strike before, that's actually what you should expect would happen when people who are rookies go to the semi-finals of the major, and they're also playing against, like, the greatest player of all time, the fucking major chat. Like, unfortunately, I know we all want it to be like the Spirit story, like, no, somehow they play great anyway, and win or lose, you know, it doesn't matter. No, it's just, unfortunately, like, that's like, it can, if you've been on the game long enough, you just know it's just likely that you're gonna have, that's the moment when it might go wrong. That's the moment when people might have a bad game. They've never been in that situation. Give me some thoughts on that, because now the battle isn't any of the other things. Not get better players. It's not, we have to get another map. Now it's, you've got to overcome essentially this aspect, the experience part, right?
Yeah. Now it's optimizing. Now it's definitely optimizing, and it's, you have to go through those situations. You have to live through those losses, which they did in the semifinals, where they got nullified by Navi, who were just leaps and bounds ahead in that specific game. You take the learnings, and the next time around we are in that situation, you're not going to be as nervous. You are going to be more assertive. You're not going to think of it as such a big deal to be in that position. And it's just natural as a human being to for it to affect you. There's very little. I don't think there's a lot of people that can go in those situations and not feel like there's any extra pressure if they haven't been in those situations before. But now it's definitely for us as an org also trying to help them out, you know, figuring out ways for us to coach them from a psychological perspective and help them go in the right direction. But also for them as a team, it's about them getting those learnings. Now, as we do this, they're also, you know, playing in playoffs of Dallas. That's going to be another possibility for them to play in front of the crowd and get comfortable in that situation. Even if you're playing with a stand-in, you know, a couple weeks time, they're going to be in Lisbon. They're going to be playing in front of a crowd once again. It's about being in those positions, because this team was born during the COVID era where everything was online, and the major, this PGL major was the first time for four of them to play in front of our crowd, right? Like, that's something to consider.
This is just a random question, but do you take any satisfaction in the fact that Snappi is like an esports boomer, but he's able to still do this?
I love it.
He's had a long career, hasn't he?
Yeah, I know. I love it. I mean, we as well. I mean, I'm 6-7 years older than him, but no, 6 years. 5-6 years older than him, but it's very, very cool to see, and his passion for the game. I mean, it's just phenomenal, and he wants to defy the odds. Like, he wants to be the guy who's playing up until he's in his 40s. So that's what he's saying today. You know, until something, his body starts hurting too much to play 8 hours a day. But no, it's cool to see, and the level he can play at. Like, he has these pop-off moments, like insane situations where he's going to win a round for you with just individual prowess. It's so cool to see a guy who's, you know, well in his, well, not well, he's like, 31 now. He's 31 years old, and he can play against the best. That's really, really cool to see.
By the way, in this story, obviously there's a lot of like crazy moments, like things have to happen a certain way, things go badly sometimes, with the Sunny example, etc. Like, do you feel over the journey of ENCE, do you feel like you've been lucky? Have things just happened for you? Has it all been hard work? What do you feel like?
I think you earn luck. I don't think luck just comes in. You have to earn it. You sometimes, like, a lot of times you have to risk it. Like I said in 2018, we went all in, everything in the middle. It was either this works out or ENCE is out of business, basically. Then fast forward to a couple of years, the whole abomination of the Finnish lineup. Everyone was saying, "Oh, ENCE is over. You know, we're never going to be seeing them again in the top echelon of Counter-Strike or anything relevant of that nature." Well, here we are. We took the learnings, we built an infrastructure, we managed to create a team that's in the very, very tip top of Counter-Strike. I think that's actually more impressive than the first time round. You know, the lightning can strike once, but, you know, typically if it's the second time coming, it means there's a trend, right? You are doing something right. So I take satisfaction in the sense that we've been able to learn from those mistakes and kind of slowly but surely building an infrastructure and a philosophy that seems like it can build teams that can be some of the best in the world.
It sounds like one final business thing I want to ask about is you alluded to the fact that like it was key to become a Louvre team and to be like a partner within the ESL circuit. It's obviously the major circuit in Counter-Strike. This is an area also where fans won't understand the journey of the org, because in 2019, a fan's again going to know, right, ENCE was the second or third best team. It's like, yeah, but the problem is when you come to this period where you and business partner with the bigger companies, that's based on your company. Unfortunately, it's not based on how good your team is in the game. So I noticed that you guys had the same problem that in 2020 and 2021, Gambit and Heroic were having, where their team was going to number one in the world, but every time you come to a Blast tournament, you come to another, it's like you're the one coming through the showdown, you're coming through these qualifiers, you're actually the number one team or number two team, but you haven't got the direct invite, you don't get put in the groups. So the Louvre one you've got, the Blast one, obviously you're on the outside a little bit. That must be the trickier part about being the smaller org, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, we were also in those discussions in 2019 with Blast as well. But it ended up so that we were part of the Louvre teams, and I think that's a great backbone for us. Definitely enabled us to build this international team. If we didn't have those Pro League spots 2 seasons a year, I mean, you have to remember the comparison between the Blast and the Louvre ecosystem. There's a massive difference. I mean, for ESL Pro League, you only get 2 seasons a year, right? The rest of it you have to earn through rankings, EPT points and all that kind of jazz. You get nothing for free. In Blast, you get basically 15 steps ahead of all the teams that are not partner teams. Like Marco Snappi has been joking about it on social media, how it's been a qualifier inception for them to make it all the way into the spring finals. It's like 15 qualifiers later, where yet another qualifier that happens in Lisbon for the world finals, right? It's a long grind.
Want to see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.